She wipes her cheeks of phantom tears. What's on tonight? It's trauma and fear. Gaze into the black mirror with eyes to see. Could it be clearer? Oh, oh, we hold these truths, you know. Oh, we've got the proof. Oh, you know the thing. Pour yourself some discernment, my friend. Distractions and traumas. One begins before the other ends. Say no, reject the lies. The truth is imperative. That's why we're reframing the narrative.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Reframing the Narrative. And once again, we are privileged to have another awesome guest this week with us. Very happy to have Brady in this discussion. We know Brady from Agent's Secret Chat that you've heard us talk about more than once. And we have some very interesting topics to cover this week. But before we get ahead of ourselves, Brady, thanks so much for joining the broadcast. Maybe just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, how you came to being part of the so-called truther community, what it is that is particularly of interest to you, anything you just want to introduce yourself as to our audience.
Yeah, thanks. How I came to the truther community, I guess, is long and complicated. I listened to Anton's episode that you guys did about a month ago, and I was thinking, when he said it started with marijuana, I thought, yeah, that's really familiar to me. That's kind of when I first sort of became kind of a libertarian when I was young, is just having the thought of like, why are they trying to control this plant and keep people from having access to it? So there was that when I was young, and that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. But I mean, you guys are about the same age as me. We all lived through 9/11. I don't see how anybody could believe any official narrative after that, obviously. And then, for the younger generation that just lived through this COVID nonsense, it's pretty kind of like the same thing all over again. It's like every time that the powers that be try to pull one of these gigantic, you know, behavior control psyops on us, it seems like all they do is expose their hand and wake more people up. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just have always kind of been a free thinker, I guess, and tried to look at all sides of things and not get trapped in one paradigm of whatever's being sold to me. I always try to look at okay, now what's the other side of this argument, instead of just, I was brought up in church, and much like Agent's writings about questioning his religion, early on for me, I just thought, well, if there's all these other religions, how do all these Christians, how are we all convinced that we're right, and all these Muslims and all these, Buddhists and everybody else is wrong? And I would ask my mom that exact question, and she would just say, well, I just know, I pray to Jesus, and that's, whatever. Like, so all these other people are wrong? Oh yeah, yeah, they're wrong. Okay, I don't believe any of this anymore. So anyway, I've always sort of questioned things, and tried to just judge from my experience. Obviously, I think experiment always trumps theory. You live through these things like 9/11, and you just go, huh, this doesn't add up, what they're telling me. And you just start looking at, the alternatives, or the other stories other than the official story, and you're like, oh, okay, I may not necessarily believe all this or all this, but you take a little here, take a little there, you sort of piece it together. You still don't know the whole truth, but you know what's wrong with it.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point there too about the powers that be and some of the big acts that they try to pull off. And the more I've become aware myself of many of these psyops, I think that they really each time get a little bit more emboldened from the last one, and they're
Yeah.
like, well, let's try something even more ridiculous and see if people bite on it. And the people that we wake up, that's okay, because guess what? We've got gatekeepers on the other side of the equation to scoop them in and get them thinking in our way from a different angle, right? And that's something that our recent guest, Franklin O'Connor, has written about in recent posts as well, that it's sort of like in politics, there's left versus right, and it doesn't matter as long as you participate on one of the sides. They really don't care whether you're asleep or so-called awake. And I think the bigger point that you had there about having critical thinking, no matter what side you're on, is the most important part. And if there's one thing that I got from years of public and private indoctrination, is I actually did learn how to think during some of that. And that's what's most important. And so many people go through those institutions and they're just like, how much can I regurgitate for an exam to get a piece of paper? But then they still never really learn to think. And then they're set up perfectly for a system that tells them what to do, how to live their lives, how to think, etc. So I think critical thinking is ultra
Yeah.
important, and there's so much that we could launch off from there. But Jake, as always, patient, quiet, waiting for a turn to talk with my big mouth. So let me just say good to see you as always, and let you add a comment in there.
Good to see you. Good to see Brady, although he's a little fuzzy right now with this connection. I like what you're both getting at with discernment, obviously, and critical thinking. And it's kind of a wonder that they get away with the indoctrination, because we're told at every step you're learning how to think. But then, in my personal experience at least, I went to college and my parents noticed the difference in me. They noticed that I was being indoctrinated. I came back home and
Mhm.
I don't even remember how I was becoming kind of, as we used to say in the 80s, a pinko. But it was kind of happening. And then the antidote to that was actually traveling to China, where they were communist,
Mm.
right? And practicing socialism with Chinese characteristics, as they like to say. And the main characteristic was real dreary cities and poverty. And I was like, oh, okay, so uh, there's a disconnect here. But anyway, I love hearing how people came to question and become critical thinkers. And I was just wondering, so if you don't mind uh, sharing with our audience, Brady, that you happen to live in Hawaii and you're
Mhm.
homesteading. And so
Mhm.
I'd like to know how the basically like following the path of critical thinking has led to
Mhm.
you homesteading. And did the COVID
Yeah.
nonsense have anything to do with being self-sufficient and being where you are these days?
Yeah. Well, it kind of all started before COVID. I've been sort of on this path for a while, but I've been in Hawaii for I think 18 years now. I live on the island of Kauai. Um, I lived in Colorado for a little while before that in the Front Range, Boulder area, and but I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. So I started out in the middle of the country, in the middle of the landmass, and ended up in the middle of the ocean. But it was a slow progression. It was just traveling around a lot around the states when I was younger, and um, ended up in Colorado. Actually, I took a farm internship back then when I was probably in my mid 20s or something, and I worked on a couple different farms out there, and I actually I first got into farming at I went to college. Speaking of pinkos, I went to college my last couple of years at Evergreen State College in Washington State. That's not where I started out. I started out in Missouri, going to college for a couple of years, but dropped out after a little bit, and then ended up going out to Washington and going to school out there. And it was a great experience. It's a beautiful place, and but I kind of knew I wanted to do something. Environmental studies is kind of what I started out in over there, and then I they had a farm, an organic farm on the school, at the school there, organic farm program. So I got into that organic farm program for my senior year of school at Evergreen, and I really loved working the farm. And I kind of always knew when I was young. And they ask you, kind of, they're trying to help you figure out what you want to do for a living, and you got all the different questions like, do you want to work at a desk? Do you want to work outside? I was always like, man, I do not want to work in a cubicle. I would much rather be outside moving around. And I kind of always thought maybe that means I'd be like a park ranger or something else. I didn't necessarily think, oh, I want to be a farmer. I grew up in the suburbs, but I got into that. I realized, hey, this is a great way to, feed people and make a living and live a healthy lifestyle. And so that's something I was really into. But then after school, somehow that turned into, oh, I'm going to go be a landscaper because I can make money in the landscape trade. So for a long time, I just was cutting grass, trimming bushes, doing all that stuff for people. Um, but what brought me to Hawaii was actually a couple of good friends of mine that I've known since high school that had moved here before me. And so I visited here a couple times before I ever moved here. And then at a certain point when I was living in Colorado, it just seemed like a good time to make a shift. My job was not really turning into what I wanted it to be at the time. And my girlfriend and I had broken up, and I was living on a month-to-month lease. And I was like, hey, this seems like a good time to cut ties here, because I had good friends and everything, and I loved it there. But I thought, my buddy out in Hawaii says he can get me a good landscaping job out there. And it's year round here. It's not like you don't stop and switch to leaf cleanup for a couple months and then snow removal for a couple months and then get back into the spring again. It's just like all year you got to trim trees and cut grass and all that stuff. So that's what I did out here for a while. But I always still kind of wanted to be a farmer deep down, and I got the opportunity to work a little piece of land, maybe about, I guess it was probably 6 or 8 years ago now, maybe 8 years. I lose track of of time, but I've been on this land with my wife for about 5, 6 years maybe, and we've got 1 acre, and it's just a little homestead, but we've got some fruit trees, we've got some cacao trees. So hopefully one of these days I'll be making some chocolate bars. I have at least gotten as far as cacao nibs, but I haven't gotten the processing of making chocolate yet. But there's a lot of people to learn from out here that are doing that on a small scale. The Hawaii chocolate business is really starting to grow, or there's a lot of people doing it on a small scale out here. But what I do mostly on the farm for my income at the farmer's market is doing microgreens, which is just really fast turnover, growing trays of broccoli sprouts and sunflower sprouts and all that stuff, and selling that stuff at the market. I do have gardens and fruit trees and stuff as well, so I supplement my market with that. But that's kind of my main thing that I'm doing at market that I'm known for. I'm the sprout guy. And so I'm here on the farm most days doing work that doesn't really pay me, where I could make a lot more money and be a lot more financially comfortable if I just would go to landscape jobs 5 days a week and come home with money in my pocket. But the lifestyle is really what it's all about, just being able to be here, living the life on a little piece of property that we own. So I wouldn't trade it for anything, really.
I think that's a great point, and it's been an educational process for me personally in my professional life to go from that W-2 working world where you're told what to do for a certain amount of money to trade your time for that money, and kind of it's all about me in that sort of lifestyle and that sort of professional setting, and going to your second mountain, and I'm using an analogy from a book I started recently called The Second Mountain. But that being said, the second mountain is one of service and serving mankind. And of course, if you do it right, you can not only serve people but make a living doing it. But it sounds to me like what's more important to you is just living the lifestyle you want and bringing something useful and nutritious to people and serving them. And it's like, well, we're doing enough to get what we need, but we're not as concerned about, you know, those fictional ones and zeros on an account screen somewhere. And I think that's really awesome. And it takes many people, if they do reach that realization that that second mountain is so important, it takes them a while to get there. And it sounds like you've already reached it. So kudos to you.
It's just feels really good growing food for people, like you said, you know, delivering nutrition. It feels a lot more fulfilling than taking care of rich people's properties for them. You know, there's a lot of wealthy people you can work for out here. I've talked to people who work for Mark Zuckerberg. He's not too far down the road, and I just like I can't imagine you know feeling at the end of the day like I did something really productive if I'm just you know serving some billionaire by trimming his bushes or cutting his fruit trees or whatever. So it just feels so much more fulfilling to go to the farmer's market and feel the thankfulness, the gratitude that people have, you know, that I'm offering them some fresh food. And so that's great. My wife actually is the main breadwinner around here, and she's a midwife. So she's a home birth midwife. So she's also doing something that's really a great service to the community. But she's paid a little more dearly for it than I am for selling some vegetables. But but between us, we do all right. You know, we managed to get by. We were able to get to visit Scotland recently, and that was a blessing. It was really beautiful. That place is pretty magical.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to the original topic that we were going to cover today. And that's just, I know it's near and dear to your heart and in front of mine for you, the idea of suppressed technology. And certainly you
Yeah,
saw a lot of evidence of the old world over there. Maybe just tell
yeah,
our listeners a little bit about what you saw and how it got your wheels turning about the things that have been held back from us.
yeah. Man, it's amazing. So we got to visit the Orkney Islands, which are off the north shore of Scotland. We saw some Neolithic sites on mainland Scotland as well, in this area called Kilmartin Glen near Oban. Um, but especially up in the Orkneys, we got to see standing stone circles. Stonehenge is the one that everybody knows, but there's actually stone circles all over the UK and Ireland. It's really incredible to just be standing there and looking at these things going, wow, somebody erected this 5,000 years ago. And what's really cool is so after the Stone Age, when everything was made out of wood and metal, you know, it was a big advancement to be able to have all this metal smelting or whatever, and to be able to make, you know, swords and tools and all this stuff. But that stuff all rusts and disappears over time, but the stones still stand. So it's like there's all this evidence of these people from 5,000 years ago, just like the pyramids, that they're a mystery to us because we don't have necessarily, you know, written records from that time. But then there's a big gap after that of a lot of history that the archaeologists don't have a record of because so much of it has rotted and rusted away, you know, but the stones are still there. So we got to visit a Neolithic village called Scarcity, which was really amazing. And they built that by they they dug out the hillside and then erected stone walls underground basically. So there were like underground stone rooms with tunnels connecting them. And that was really amazing. And then we also saw some tombs over there as well, that were basically stone structures built into hills. They call them cairns or cairns, is usually what they're called. But yeah, it's just amazing to be able to see those things and think, wow, this is, you know, like, yeah, just so old. Like pretty much the same time frame around when the pyramids in Egypt supposedly were built. And so, you know, they lived probably a fairly primitive life. But they they seemed to have a pretty advanced civilization for the limited, you know, tools that they did have. Now, as far as sort of the old world buildings and things that we discuss when we're talking about Tartaria or the Masons and all this, like, you know, I really connected to which I'm not an incredibly religious person, even though I was raised Christian, but I went in a lot of old cathedrals. We got to see cathedrals and castles while we were over there, and the cathedrals are just amazing. That's the beginning of the Masons, right? I mean, they were stonemasons. And there's so much symbology carved into these old structures. You walk through there and you see, you know, a lot of it is obviously very Christian based, like saints that you would read about and or you know Bible stories and all that. But then there's a lot of other symbology as well that's related to more like Rosicrucians, Knights Templar, whatever, and which is all the symbology that's been carried on through the Masons down into the present. And you know, at one point, it became there was the you see it sometimes they say the what is it, the free and accepted Masons or something. And so the Freemasons were, once you've gone through your apprenticeship and your journeyman, then you become a Freemason. You're an established like member of the Masons, right? You're a master Mason. So those are the Freemasons, I believe. And then they started to accept people who weren't Masons into their group, into their clubs, their secret societies, whatever. And those are the accepted Masons. They were not actually the stonemasons, but they were the outsiders that were, you know, that became kind of took over. And then obviously all the, who knows exactly what's gone on inside of all these secret societies. But I think that, you know, we know that the Illuminati grew out of, you know, so there's sects within Masonry. It's not like it's all one monolithic group. And you know, I think a lot of conspiracy theory revolves around the Masons, and there's a lot of Masonry that's very innocent at the lower levels, and then there's these inner sects. It's always like circles within circles of, you know, the inner circle, the outer circle doesn't know what the inner circle's doing, right? So there is a lot of nefarious things, I think, that grew out of the Masons, but it's because they already had this closed society. And so then inner sects grew within that. So there's secretive groups within the secretive groups.
I think you gave us a lot to chew on there, and I would just say that it is funny that you look at some of these old world structures like the ones that you saw, and you shared some photographs in the chat, and I just kind of laugh at some of the explanations they give us. As you mentioned, they say, oh, they just had these limited tools, and yet they created these amazing pieces of architecture, these castles, cathedrals, whatever, that we in modern day times would struggle to build and replicate with our own tools. And so
Yeah.
it really does speak to the reality that there was something else that was being used. Now, we can speculate, and I have and can on the ways that they were doing that. And it'll just be my best guess because we'll never truly know. But yeah, it's just, it's like you brought up the psyops of 9/11 and COVID. It's just obvious when you put those details together to match the story, and it rarely matches the story. And there's so many directions we could take this conversation. Is it free energy, leveraging the ether, you know, all of these things? I think they're all at play. But when you and I had communicated before getting on this podcast together, you know, you had a very clear vision of what suppressed technology means. Which angle were you coming at it from? What investigations have you done? What's most interesting to
Yeah.
you about what's potentially being held back?
Well, real quickly, from what you just were saying, it is really amazing with these giant stone structures, these giant stones that they used, and the pyramids as well. Uh, they can they can they've discovered that, you know, okay, well, these stones came from this quarry based on the geology of this area. We know that these stones came from 5 miles away or more. Some of the stones that were used in the pyramids came from very far away. And it's like, oh yeah, we just rolled them on logs with, you know, we had unlimited slaves. So we just, you know, it's like, yeah, I don't know. That doesn't quite make sense. Maybe, you know, if they got enough slave labor, you can do a lot. The Nazis accomplished a lot with a lot of slave labor, right? Um, But anyway, as far as free energy, to me, it's I think it's our birthright that we have abundant energy. We have, natural health. Uh, Poverty is manufactured, I think, we're kept poor because we're kept in a system where bankers run our lives and and they control the money. But there's been a lot of technology that's come out over the years, especially during the 20th century is more what I'm familiar with from my own reading and stuff. Starting with Tesla and on forward, there were many people who were coming up with basically free energy technologies of drawing, power out of the ether of the universe or whatever that is just abundant all around us, and yet many of those people were silenced in one way or another, and those technologies have never dripped down to us. And then again, so that's the that's basically the oil cartels keeping us from having that stuff, right? Because they can't sell their oil. And now, ever since the 70s, the United States dollar is based on oil, right? It's the petrodollar. So it's not only the oil, but it's the whole financial structure that the bankers have created that would collapse if we had alternatives to that. And then also, a lot of the pharmaceutical industry comes from the oil industry. A lot of it is petrochemicals that they're using to make into these poisons that they sell all of us and people take willingly. And so that's another thing is we have had, so many people through the years that have had these technologies like, I've cured cancer, and then that person just disappears and you never hear about what they were doing. And a lot of these things are starting to be revived of these ways of creating abundant energy and natural health and healing. But it's an uphill struggle when the world is controlled by cabals of people who just want to rule us, right? So that's kind of where I go with it is like, how come we don't all have, we should all be living like happy, healthy lives, but there's always something to keep us down. It used to be the population bomb. Oh, we're just, I think a lot of the elites, the eugenicists, they still believe that there's just not enough room and resources on this planet for all of us. And so we got to just kill people off every couple generations with a war or with a plague or whatever to be able to keep, to keep the resources for ourselves and not have to share it with all these peasants, right? So that's what COVID was, right? I mean, I think there was more to it than that, but I also think it all ties to the money. It all ties back to the financial empire. I mean, our money is collapsing yet again. They always find a way to prop it up for another decade or generation, and it's failing again. And that's kind of what a lot of the Great Reset is about, is a financial reset that they have to figure out how are we gonna get everybody to accept. They've already got us to accept these pieces of paper that have no value and interact with that, transact with that, and now they're trying to get us to just accept the digital version of that, which is at least as valueless as the pieces of paper are, when we all know that what's really valuable is resources. It's land, it's metals, it's food, it's, bullets or whatever, cigarettes. I don't know, but no, but uh, but it's, it's things that have value, and money is not a thing. It's just a method of trade, of facilitating trade. And so the people that have created the money that we use to facilitate our trade are obviously the ones that are ruling over us and keeping us all enslaved as much as they can, right? So it always kind of comes back to the money. And it's not just the Federal Reserve. It's obviously the Federal Reserve is just a branch of the Bank of England or whatever. And that's probably a branch of the Swiss, World Bank or whatever. They're kind of all one big thing. Just like all the intelligence agencies are the same thing. Is there really any difference between CIA and MI6 and Mossad? Is it not really just one organization with three names? It's the same with the bankers, I think.
Yeah,
So
and you touched on a really important point, and it's something that I brought into recent podcasts that, it was a big awakening moment for me earlier this year, and I'll credit Garrett Gunderson for opening my eyes to the reality of scarcity versus abundance. And in
yeah.
his case, it was really setting your mind right in terms of how you view the world and recognizing that there's no lack of abundance out there. And it's really how you choose to see that world and the opportunity that's in front of you. But to the larger point that you're making, you're really talking about this world that we were born into. There's this artificial system of scarcity that has been created to keep us enslaved or under control. And the reality of this situation is our creator, and I do believe there's a creator, gave us everything we need in crazy abundance. And it's ironic that
Yeah.
I do believe that free energy has been used in the past and it's still there on some level, and we just don't know how to tap into it like our,
Mm-hmm.
prior generations knew how to do that. But even beyond that, okay, so we go to the next best thing, which is using petroleum as an energy source. Even those controllers created this ridiculous idea of them being from fossils and fossil fuels, and
Mm-hmm.
making them
Yeah.
seem scarce as well, when the reality is people have looked at that. There's infinite pools of petroleum
Mm-hmm.
underneath the world or underneath our
Yeah.
surface that could go
Mm-hmm.
infinitely. Like it's not
Yeah.
a scarce resource. And it's like so many levels of deception about scarcity, and the reality is we were born with literally everything we need around us, and most people don't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. What do you think, Jake?
Well, I think the way these systems have been designed and the way they work just points to something that I like to drive home very often. It's like the McKinsey approach, right? It's all about management of resources and
Mm-hmm.
abundance for the people that control it. And so
Yeah.
someone like Rockefeller, who had an abundance of oil and wanted to sell it, came up with the idea of, okay, how do I just, I'm a robber baron. How do I just make this a vertical integration of all my resources?
Mm-hmm.
And he had the wherewithal and the means to get the right people in place and found the institutions to create basically out of a basis of zero foundation Rockefeller medicine as we know it, to those of us
Yeah.
that are in the conspiracy realm, like we'll call it that. And I hate that word, but anyway. So
Right.
it, but a lot of this you two have brought up is a really, I think people can be easily shocked and say like, what do you mean the system doesn't work for us? It's
Mm-hmm.
how could just a small group dominate and
Mm-hmm.
and create this kind of system? Well, yeah, it's very obvious that there's an example right there, the ready example of creating an entire medical paradigm and industry that only keeps people sick and on a low
Mm-hmm.
level, and we know about the destruction of resources, the forced consolidation of farms and the destruction of crops
Mm-hmm.
in the former Soviet Union, especially in what's now known as
Yeah.
the Ukraine. So these things can
Mm-hmm.
happen, and it's all on behalf of the people that are the haves. And so those that are naive enough to think that the system works for us, well, I'm sorry, but yeah, you can live a decent life, but it's really abundance is there, but we're struggling against a paradigm that is based on scarcity for the convenience of the controllers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Uh, it's, I'm not sure where to go with that, but that's,
Well,
yeah.
technology, right? Suppressed
Yeah.
technology as
Yeah.
well. What when do we get the technology? Probably when those that have developed it decide that it's useful for them to share it with the masses. And so bringing
Mm-hmm.
up the idea of digital currency, how are people being entrapped by this, by any new iteration of technology is the convenience factor,
Yeah.
right? Why do
Yeah.
you give your biometrics to TSA? Because
Yeah.
you don't want to take your bloody shoes off and your
Right.
belt, you know? So
Well, you're not
it's,
given a
it's
choice, right?
yeah,
They,
if you want to use their system, yeah.
yeah, if you want to travel on an airplane, they're going to make you go through that. If you want to use their money, that's what they're trying to turn money into. At this point, you can get cash from somewhere and you can go and spend cash somewhere, and it's not trackable and accountable in such a way where, if they really want to control us, they need the digital money because they can turn it off. They can put limits on it. They can say, okay, you're over your carbon footprint for the month or whatever, so we're shutting off your money. Or you apparently have criticized Israel, so we're shutting your bank down, or whatever it is, right?
No
Yeah,
soup for
that
you, anti-Semite.
they need that control. They need that control. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, without the pervasive surveillance and tracking, they can't control us, and so that's why, and then another thing is the AI that they're using now, that they're growing bigger and bigger by the day, is a huge suck of resources, and they've been trying to suppress fusion fusion power for a long time, and they're finally getting to the point where they're going to start to release some of it because they need uh, a greater power source to be able to power their AI, their huge data banks of computers or whatever, to be able to run their digital Satan that they want to unleash on the world, right? I mean, and so that's it's almost like, yeah, they won't release the technology to the world until they're forced to, because they need it themselves, and they need to, and it's like, well, okay, we'll let the plebs have the drippings from our plate or whatever, because we're going to need this plasma fusion technology or whatever. We're going to go ahead and let them know that we've been working on this thing for 40 years or whatever, and now all of a sudden it's commercializing or whatever. I think that's coming soon. I think you know and yeah, the digital cash thing is definitely coming, but we do have the power to stop it. I think a lot of people feel powerless in the shadow of this giant, you know, system that rules over us. But we're not really powerless, and we just need to. I mean, some people are in a better situation than others, but we need to focus on our local communities um, of support. Knowing where your food comes from, and even if you can't own land, just having good neighbors who you can trust to help out when you need something, or helping others is a good way to get help when you need it, for sure. As far as building community, I think that's really important. And I think it's just, yeah, it's easy to be black pilled these days, but I like to be optimistic that we do create our own reality, and there is abundance, and we need to focus on the abundance and call it in, because it's easy to look at a lot of things going on in the world and get depressed about war and poverty and plague, but we have the power to make the choice to reject all that, if we really can find it in ourselves to do so. And for a lot of people, it is just faith in a creator, and knowing that creator is not gonna let you down, and you're gonna thrive, because this world is here for us to enjoy, and to advance and co-create, right?
Oh, I love that you
Absolutely.
used that. Sorry. Sorry, PJ.
Go ahead, Jake.
I was literally just chomping at the bit to jump in and mention a fantastic podcast, 3 hours that just flew by for me at 1.25 speed, of course. But with it was The Way Forward, Alex Zek. Sorry, Medicine
Yeah.
Girl. A fantastic interview with Molly Englehart, who has
Okay.
gone from being a farmer and being celebrated by NPR and all of the prescribed media because she had a farm to table vegan restaurant in Southern California. Well, now she has completely changed, moved to Texas, and she grows and slaughters cows and
Mm-hmm.
all that's involved. So she's no longer a media darling. But anyway, it's just filled with nuggets. And she brought up co-creation, and that's where
Yeah.
we can, instead of seeing ourselves as antagonistic and opposed to nature, and nature's out to get us, or we're out to conquer nature, we
Yeah.
can find ways to make it even more abundant by using the natural gifts, as we said before in a previous episode. This works for society as well in a sort of
Mm-hmm.
permaculture paradigm. And I was
Yeah.
literally just dying to jump in and mention co-creation, and then you use
Yeah.
that term, and
Yeah.
and she pointed out that the natural landscape around where she used to live in Southern California was just barren, right? Just like
Mm-hmm.
straw colored hills. But if you just gave it what it needed, you could create massive abundance and share that with
Mm-hmm.
people at no cost to the environment. In fact, regenerative farming is the most
Yeah.
environmentally friendly thing in the world. Yeah. So sorry to jump in there on you, PJ, but that was just too coincidental. The term and the concept of co-creation is really key
Yeah.
here.
Well, I've already forgotten what I was going to say because you brought up such a good point there, Jake. And, just kind of this idea of co-creation, and also what Brady had mentioned too about this world was made for us to enjoy and experience, right? And I love that example, Jake, of this farmer who went from, basically creating an environment for vegan lifestyle to living in Texas and raising cows. And I just thought, man, if there was any more evidence that you needed that a creator wanted us to eat a cow and use it for food, like, I don't know what else you'd be looking for. I mean, they're ugly animals that are there to be utilized as food. It's just so obvious to me. And I had the same idea earlier today when one of my cats came in and was demanding attention. And it's like, wow, how cool is it that these animals were created for us just to want to be companions, and that they're like, hey, it's your time to give me attention. I'm here to be your companion, right? Like, how cool is that? And that's just another part of co-creation. And I think it ties in
Mm-hmm.
really well to what you're doing, Brady, and the farming and just giving back to the community, and creating that full cycle for, from nature to people and back. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you know, not to bring it down a notch or anything, but thinking about the farming and all that, for some reason I was thinking, and the just the way that they try to control us and rule over us. The stratospheric aerosol injections are really a and the HARP stuff too. All of that is really designed to keep us from being able to have healthy land. You were talking about the brown landscape around Southern California, how dry it is and barren, and it's like they're trying at least whoever it is that owns those planes that fly overhead and leave all these gas clouds that are dropping chemicals on us. Uh, they are trying to foil our agriculture, to keep us from being able to provide for ourselves so that they can sell us artificial food. And I think that that's a challenge that we're going to be finding more and more solutions for. But that is something that is inescapable. It's like I saw chemtrails when I was in Europe. Actually, flying through Amsterdam, they were bombing Amsterdam the day that I flew through there. There was so many chemtrails. I could see them when I was at the airport. I could see just tons of them being laid out in a grid, and I did see them in Scotland as well. So it's not just happening in the United States; it's happening everywhere. I can't necessarily speak to Africa and Asia as much. I've been to Japan and I don't really remember seeing them there, but I'm sure they're doing it everywhere. I mean, uh, they they are trying to, keep us from growing our food, and I think there are solutions to that, and I think there's a lot of people that are working on that problem. I mean, I know a lot about regenerating soil and all that, but if you've got aluminum and barium falling on your fields, that's not so easy to remediate. It's not a simple thing, but yeah, maybe more and more we'll be eating things that come from inside greenhouses. I don't know, but that's something that I think about a lot. Like how do we deal with that? That's something
I,
that they're doing that is hard to figure out what the answer is.
Jake, I know you've got a thought there. I'm going to let
okay.
you jump in. I can see
Okay.
it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that CIA Tucker Carlson interviewed Dane Wigington of
Oh, I heard
Geoengineering
that. I
Watch,
didn't get to hear it. Yeah.
and he pretended that he was like, "All tell me about chemtrails. I know Wikipedia is not going to give me the truth. CIApedia or Spookpedia." And I listened to most of it, and I don't know who to trust. Like, I don't know Tucker, I don't know Dane Wigington, but it's
Yeah.
the secret's almost out there. It's almost like why are they admitting that the people in positions of power have a tendency to traffic and abuse underage humans?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's pretty much common knowledge.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Getting back to the trails of chemistry, um,
Yeah.
we'll see where that ends up. There's probably a reason for it. Maybe a bit of like a smoke screen, no pun
Yeah.
intended. Yeah, but just you mentioned Asia and Africa. Anecdotally, I have never seen, I lived in Asia for most of
Mm-hmm.
my adult life and I never saw chemtrails, but through the internet, I was aware of these programs and I'd never seen one myself. And then when I was back visiting North America or when I moved back, the first time I actually saw the grid pattern in the sky, I literally wept. I couldn't help myself. It was
Yeah.
just like these things are real and this stuff is falling down on us. It's like the REM
Mm-hmm.
song "Fall on Me." You put it in the sky, it's gonna fall down on somebody. And we covered a little bit of how that penetrates all of the biosphere in a recent upcoming episode that we have where we talked about an article that Mellow Cat on Substack shared. So we'll get to that, but that's a little preview. But it's just pervasive and it gets in, like you said, the soil and then all the plant life. And there's just no substitute for the energy that you can get from the sun. So if we hide everything into hydroponics and indoor
Yeah.
greenhouses, anything, it's just not going to work. And I think there's something about, we're getting at energy suppression on in this conversation, whether it's the sunlight, natural sunlight, or it's
Mm-hmm.
means of powering, or it's just literally the energy that we have in the ether and amongst ourselves, like the 6 feet apart. I mean, that wasn't that about the energy, the auras and the ether and the way people interact and connect with each other.
It
I'll
blows
leave you
my
with that
mind.
one.
I still see those stickers on the ground in the post office or the bank or something. It's like, God, can you guys peel these things up already? That was five
I
years ago now. Like, and they're gonna leave them there forever until they just get scuffed away.
Well,
Yeah.
it's never going away. I mean, they never through the mainstream news there was never an announcement like you can permanently get rid of those masks. There are people who still wear them
Oh
around.
yeah,
Those
it's
stickers are
crazy.
still on the ground, and as I brought up in a somewhat recent podcast, I remember being at LaGuardia a year or two ago and seeing
Mhm.
etched on the glass newly renovated masks required in the airport type of signage,
Yeah.
and it's like that was not an accident, that was by design. Like this,
Yeah.
they have that ready to pull out whenever they feel they need it or want to just pull another big
Mm-hmm.
psyop. So yeah, that is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, a lot of
But
people still wear the masks, you know?
it's
It's
crazy.
it's wild.
But
Yeah.
so I mean, you said that you were bringing things down a little bit, and for a second you changed the course of the conversation. But I want to bring it back up because
Please.
you were talking about how you, there's this force beyond our control. In this case, chemistry in the sky.
Hmm.
Experimentation on mankind, whatever. But it's not as though we are powerless, and we're powerful in so many ways. And there's the antidote for anything is action, right? And it can be action through
Yeah.
awareness. It can be action through you just being out there in your fields, figuring out what can I do to counteract this? What new approach can I do?
Hmm.
I'm still tending to my plants and I'm still doing my thing. Uh,
Hmm.
as long as you're not ever playing the victim, it's like, well, what is it that I can do? What action can I take? What things are out of my control, and accepting that, right? But
Yeah.
action is always the antidote. And I think that's whatever that looks like for you and other people, that's ultimately the solution.
Right. Right. And you can't find solutions if you don't know what the problems are. So even though it's like, oh, I'm going to bring it down for a minute, it's like, this is a really important problem that we need to be focusing on solutions for, right? So if you don't discuss the problem and understand the problem, you can never get to the solution. So it is, it is something that we're gonna just live through and work out. And I don't know. It's amazing though. It's such a tangible example of how people can be just so unaware of what's going on around them. When I visited my parents last year or something, I was like, do they always spray so much here? And my mom's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, Mom, do you look up? Look up. What is that? It's like, how you really don't see that? It's going on a lot. Well, I'm in town. I'm sure it's going on all the time when I'm not here. Like, how do you not see that? And, I guess it's the same with anything like 9/11 or COVID. If people are, if, if people don't want to be, you know, aware, they can just go on living in their fantasy that, everything's okay and the government's here to help me, and these pharmaceuticals are keeping me healthy or whatever it is. Uh, but, um, but yeah, that's just a real tangible example because, like, how can you not see it? It's obviously happening. You might be able to come up with some explanation. Oh, it's something other than what people are telling me, but it's there. You can see it. you know, you can't really see what they're doing with HARP. That's why it's all the way off in Alaska, because, they're doing something nefarious and they don't want to tell you what it is, and they don't want anybody coming there to look at their facility. But you can see the lines in the sky, you know. And yeah, and it's we're gonna find ways to counteract that, just like all the other bad things they try to do to us. You gotta be
Yeah,
positive.
absolutely. And you brought up the digital currency thing earlier in the broadcast, and Jake and I have talked about that, where we still have the choice to say no to a lot of that, and to force the issue of cash, to force the issue of dining out, asking for a physical menu, and making it inconvenient. Like, these are all choices that we can
Yeah,
make, or we can go
yeah,
along with the program and just accept the consequences. But that choice is
yeah,
100% ours.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
You don't think QR codes are the greatest development of technology in the past 5 millennia, PJ? Seriously? It's the greatest thing ever.
And
Yeah.
funny how those are like now commonplace after 2020, and it's just accepted that that's how we do things now. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to look at from the first smartphone in the early aughts or whenever that came online, maybe
Mm-hmm.
2010ish, to and it's like now it's like, oh, look at what they've created for us, this new convenience. By the way,
Mm-hmm.
it comes with strings attached.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Just look what
definitely.
happened in Vietnam. They turned off how many bank accounts? It was like 8 million bank accounts or something of that order.
I heard
people that
something
wouldn't
about that, but I
get.
didn't hear the details. This is something that just recently happened, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we
Yeah.
saw, I mean, a great example of just if you don't play along, it's the same. We can get a foretaste of programmable currency and social credit with just the trucker situation in
Hmm.
Canada during the COVID
Yeah.
malarkey. And now we're seeing countries, they're starting to mandate. We know a mandate isn't a law, but they're starting to mandate that you get on board, you get on those rails. And I think as far as cash expenditure goes, France just put a cap on the amount of currency, or the top amount that you're allowed to pay cash for. Like, let's just
Right.
give an example. Like it used to be $10,000 of any transaction, bank transaction that would
Hmm.
before it would be reportable. Now it's $600. So maybe France
Yeah.
is doing the same kind of thing, like
So
10,000
crazy.
francs you can exchange at the farmer's market or Costco or
Hmm.
Carrefour, as they say. But yeah, and so what's the next step to that is, well, yeah, anything has got to be reportable and it's got to be trackable and traceable. So what are you going to do about it? Like you said, Brady, you become
Hmm.
aware of a problem and you either take action or you don't. You either find a
Yeah.
solution or you don't.
Yeah. There's always going to be some way to circumvent uh, whatever they're doing, but oftentimes it does come at a great cost to our own abilities to just have the freedom to do things the way, like, yeah, I could refuse to go through the TSA checkpoint, but I'm not going to get on that plane that I want to get on to go where I'm going. It's like, what's the alternative? I get on a slow boat across the ocean to go to the mainland or something. So uh, I don't know. So yeah, but I think, positivity and, recognizing the abundance that we have and focusing on our community and our, the people around us. A lot of times their technologies are a double-edged sword, right? The internet gave us so much freedom from their controlled media for at least to some degree. They had media locked down with their, three networks or whatever that powerful people controlled. And your nightly news from Peter Jennings or Tom Brokaw going to, like, all of a sudden you've got a million different channels of streaming, YouTubers or whatever that are offering a million different opinions and conspiracy theories. You said you hate that term, conspiracies, but the thing about conspiracy theory is a tainted term, obviously, that's used to color people as crazies. But uh, anybody who looks around, like, if you don't think that the world has always been run by a conspiracy of small power, a small conspiracy of a few powerful men, like, is what has always run the world. It is run by conspiracy. Everything that happens to us is a conspiracy of, industrialists or bankers or secret societies or whatever you want it to be. They're not all necessarily one big monolith. There's lots of different groups, but a lot of times their agendas overlap. But yeah, they're doing everything they can to try and control our lives. But we have ultimate control over creating our own destiny, and choosing our fate. And sometimes it does mean that we have to not use their systems, but we create our own parallel systems, right? That we can use to escape theirs as much as we can. And there's always people coming up with new parallel systems that we can use. But yeah, the internet is a great example, I think, of how, they created something with a military purpose and then they released it to us and we all used it against them to some degree. Now they have a whole new, ways of controlling people through the internet with all of their influencers and all their different things, all their bots and all this crazy stuff. But there's usually advantages and like you were saying with cell phones, it has made us, it has been a great tool to have a computer in your pocket and be able to access all this information and communicate with people, but it also makes it possible to track and surveil everything that we do and everywhere we go. So, you take the good with the bad, or you just, if you choose to just go more the Amish route, you can just reject all their technology and live a simple life if you want to. But a lot of times we take their bad because we get some benefit out of it at the same time, and it's not always an easy black or white. Everything's not all good or all bad. It's kind of like you have to recognize, you just have to be aware. You have to use critical thinking, like you were saying before, to bring it back to the beginning. It's like, you know, um, yeah, or there, you look at, I kind of look at everything like the political paradigm of, there's this fake right wing and this fake left wing, and you have to choose a side. There's nothing outside this paradigm that we've created. You have to either be a Republican or a Democrat. It's a divide and conquer strategy that they've been using since the beginning of time to create this false paradigm of, oh, you have to choose this or this. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists, There's no, I just want to be left alone and not be on either of your stupid teams or whatever, right? They don't want us to think that you can do that, but obviously you can. You don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat. You can be an anarchist if you want to. And
Yeah.
reject.
I was just going to say, I mean, everything you said, perfect wrapping up point for this conversation today. Just the choice is always ours, right? And that's really
Yeah.
where I wanted to bring it home. But go ahead, Jake, take us home.
Well, I would just like to propose that we co-create with technology, just like we co-create with
Yeah.
God's gifts, right? Yeah. So, yeah, don't be black-pilled. Let's co-create with the means available and put it to good use, and we'll see where it goes. But yeah, it's maybe not always pretty, but we'll get somewhere new, and that's always exciting.
Absolutely. And we co-created here today using the same type of technology we're talking about. We had a good discussion. Brady, thanks for
Hey.
your time today. It was awesome. Really enjoyed your
Yeah, thank you
perspective on
guys.
this and everything you're doing with homesteading and keeping it real out there in Hawaii. So, yeah, thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me on. I really enjoyed it. It's great talking with you guys.
Yeah, same here. And I'll just say to our listeners, stay tuned. We got more guests lined up and coming your way, and we'll talk soon.